Hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Trekell Art Supplies. Last week, I announced that we are doing a very special episode with founder Brian Trekell and President Courtney Bridges. They'll both be here to answer your questions about brushes and panels. If you've got questions for Trekell, just go to savvypainter.com/Trekell. That's Trekell. Submit your questions by February 15th. Trekell offers sensibly priced art supplies conveniently shipped to your door. At Trekell.com, you'll find everything from their own line of handmade panels and brushes to oil paints and mediums by Gamblin and Golden Acrylics. My guest this week is figurative painter Karen Offutt. Karen was born and raised in Dallas, Texas by a creative family who encouraged her to explore her artistic talent from an early age. Her father was an artist and her mother is a designer and owner of a needlepoint company. In this episode, Karen talks about how she got an introduction to her first gallery representation from the artist Quang Ho, how she chose which paintings to submit, and when you listen carefully throughout this episode, a common thread is how the relationships Karen has built with other artists has helped her throughout her career. By being there to bounce ideas off of, providing help with gallery situations, social connections, and collaborating to keep live drawing skills up. These relationships have been really important to Karen's career. She also talks about what happened when she had to take a few years off to care for her kids. Her son, at 2 years old, developed severe eczema, and at the same time, Karen was diagnosed with celiac and had a newborn. Karen shares what she learned from this experience about trusting herself, self-care, and the unwavering faith that she would return to painting. You'll also hear about her studio practices, how Karen brings in models, and one of my favorite stories, the surprise model who showed up while she was setting up for an entirely different painting. And lastly, for those of you in the Austin area, Karen, along with her Austin-based cohorts, is opening up a new Atelier in Austin, Texas. So if you're in the Austin area, definitely check out Atelier Dojo Austin. It is opening this April. Okay, here's Karen. Karen, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter Podcast. I'm excited to talk with you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited. This is a thrill.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started out as an artist. What were some of the artists that you looked at when you were younger that sort of inspired you?
I come from a creative family. My mother had a needlepoint wholesale company. So she was painting needlepoint canvases and creating designs. And my father did paint and he did draw. He didn't really pursue it. He just kind of did it on his own. So I was always surrounded by that, and that always fascinated me. But living in Dallas, Texas it wasn't easy to find any formal training for realism. So I kind of learned it on my own a little bit. And it was the one thing that I knew how to do because I just was obsessed with it. Uh-huh. And it didn't really help me in my school. My grades weren't that great, but so it was the one thing that I knew something about, and it stuck with me. And going through school and high school, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on that kind of training, so I really wanted to do my own thing. And in some ways we were being taught sponge art, And
like, you mean like the kind where you're like making imprints with a sponge, literally?
Yeah.
In high school?
I'm like, well, no. Yeah. Some of that. Yeah. Wow. Sometimes it was happening. And I'm like, what are we doing?
Are you babysitting us?
Yeah. What is this? So, but I did on my own. I did a lot of playing with drawing and watercolor. I used to ride horses growing up. I was competing in equestrian shows and loved horses. So I would draw horses and out of my own mind, because I learned the anatomy. And that kind of started this thing where I was just like, I want accuracy. I want to work on this. Yeah. And I went to college and took some courses there. I was in North Texas State.
Did you go as an art major?
No. Well, I went in for advertising. I actually graduated high school the year before they brought computers into the high school. So I missed the whole computer world. And so I was learning advertising. I would take studio classes. But, it's kind of that general, like, here's some paint, here's an easel, go at it. And I was totally not directed in any kind of way. And so that was hard. It was more modern art trend at that time. And that was not my thing. But I was like, okay, well, it's apparently a good art school. And so basically what I did was I would take, some classes here or there. And I would get jobs that were art related, painting furniture, for example, like musical Alice in Wonderland furniture. I did that for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I was also designing needlepoint canvases and whatnot. And so that kind of, I never finished college because I just was not into it. And I was like, I am making money on the weekends in Dallas. I think I'm just going to stay in Dallas for a while and kind of see where this takes me. Because back in the day, now with the internet and social media, I had none of that.
Right.
So it's basically, where do I go to learn this? And it just wasn't really happening in Texas at that time. This was, in the 80s, 90s. So I just kind of, as long as I was working with paint, I felt like at least I have my finger on it.
Yeah.
And at some point I'll figure it out.
Yeah. It's like, as long as you have a paintbrush in your hand for any reason at all, life is good.
Yes. Yeah. So I moved. I have to look back here. It's been so many years and such an evolution because it's like I can't say that there's one definitive time where I said, this is my path.
You just kept going.
Yeah. And with, the kind of commercial art, mass-produced art, that kind of stuff, I was still working with paint. I was doing someone else's work. So I didn't have a voice. I got to mastering a technique for that, but it wasn't my voice. So, it took me several years, and I would take classes here and there at community colleges and just be like, this isn't where I'm wanting to go. This is, push me, like, show me something.
You felt like they were kind of just dialing it in a sense? Is that?
Yeah. Well, you just like, this is how you draw a shadow. And you're like, well, I know that,
Right.
Look at all these paintings from 200 plus years ago. How did they do that?
Oh, no, I was just going to ask at what point did you finally feel like you were getting the instruction that you needed, and where did you find it?
Right. So with being immersed in this kind of job, I was really getting down, and I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I'm good at it, but I'm not enjoying this, and I've got to find something. And back in the day, we had the yellow pages.
I remember the yellow pages.
I look at the yellow pages. It's crazy. Yeah. So I found, because at that time my husband and I were living in Austin, or, when we moved to Austin, and I found this, like, one of the first phone numbers was Austin Fine Art Classes. And it is run by a woman named Elizabeth Locke here in town. And I said, you know what? I am not investing in anything until I see it for myself. And I basically drove down. It was on the south side of town. I drove there to look in the window. And I did. And it was like, oh my God, there are paintings on the wall, there are easels, there's like everything you can imagine that would go into a real art studio. And then I was hooked. It's like, okay, I'm in.
What was it like your first day studying there?
Well, considering I've never painted with oils,
Uh-huh.
I really wanted to learn. And I was painting with acrylic, which is totally different.
Yes.
So the first class, believe it or not, you sit on those, what do you call those, drawing benches or the horses or whatever.
Yeah, they're called the horse benches, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. And so that was the first class. You sit on the bench, you have a big piece of newsprint.
Mm-hmm.
You are holding a piece of charcoal, doing a large figure 8 and breathing.
Whoa.
And I thought, what is going on?
I was not expecting to hear that.
Yeah. And, in the beginning, you're like, well, I don't understand why we're doing this. But I finally got it because I was almost reprogrammed. It was like, instead of getting really close to your painting with your fingers, it's try to be loose, be with it, and use your arms and just let it flow. And it kind of trains your arm and your hand how to be away from your face and, more into the painting and be a little looser.
I'm sort of imagining this weird, like, yoga for artists or something like that.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that it's weird, but an really interesting take on this of breathing while drawing. Is that right?
Yeah, just breathe. And yeah, it was really interesting. And I look back on it and I think, God, that was so great. Because it's like, just calm yourself.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. Be with this moment. So yeah, it started there. And then, learning monochromatic studies and values and composition. And then you start learning about color. And basically you would train by doing copies of master paintings.
Yep.
So a copy of a Sargent, or just, the close-up of the face. And that was really helpful for me because I knew how to paint really tight and draw really tight. And I couldn't wrap my brain around how are they so loose in their application. And she said, Elizabeth told me, she said, for every 5 brush strokes, do 3.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made a lot of sense. And so from there, and we became friends, and there was a little bit of a group of people in that. And we started doing workshops with other artists, which to me was like, oh my gosh, I get to meet a rock star. Mm-hmm. So that was amazing for me. I was like, oh, yeah. So, I mean, I was like, there's Greg Kreutz. I took Greg Kreutz and then David LaFell, all the way up to Kim English, Ron Hicks, Kwang Ho. So it was kind of over the years just learning how to approach painting in my own way.
Yeah. And that's a pretty diverse group of artists that you learned from, it sounds like.
Yeah. It was really helpful.
I'm so curious about that first exercise that she did. I'm kind of fascinated by it because the more I keep thinking, I'm kind of like rolling around in the back of my head. Because at first I could totally understand just thinking, what? You want me to what? Like, what? Oh, yeah. Why are we doing this? And at first glance, it almost feels like those, another version of those sponge paintings where it's kind of like, are you kidding me? You want me to what?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was a method to madness that I thought was madness, but it really was definitely reprogramming, rethinking everything because sometimes you get into a spot and you don't feel like you're breathing. Mm-hmm. It's like you're holding your breath or you're getting too close and getting too into one area, and it just kind of freed you up and opened your I haven't done yoga in years, but it just opens you up.
Especially at that point in an artist's learning process when you're kind of really just getting into the studio thing. Like I know there's lots of artists that, I remember my first class and just being absolutely terrified of everything, like who are these other people and are they going to, am I good enough to be in here? And all these thoughts that happen when you first start taking art classes. But then even when you're in front of your own canvas, a lot of times people come in with all the stress of whatever happened during the day, all the anxiety that comes with being an artist. And so I kind of like, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm kind of like in love with this sort of yoga for artists. Just loosen up, kick things off. And do you ever still do that or anything similar?
No. Well, I mean, I think what it did for me is it changed, and the way you hold your brush was different than I was used to, where you just kind of hold it between your, I don't even know if I could explain it, but, like you're holding it between your thumb and your index finger, and then your pinky is up kind of idea. And then when you move the opposite direction, you turn it underneath. So you're making this fluid movement. It's almost like Tai Chi, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's just this kind of way of going in with your paintbrush, your paint stroke, and make it fluid, as opposed to going in as if you were digging through something, in which I was used to back then.
Yeah.
But it allows you to get looser when you need to. And so, yeah, it was very, very nice to take that anxiety out, because I was like, I have no idea what this monster is, and please guide me.
Right.
But she did customize. Everybody was at a different level in her class. So she would say, if you had absolutely no idea about painting or drawing or shadows or anything like that, she would start from the beginning. And then for me, I kind of bumped up a little bit because I kind of already had a little bit of an understanding. So she does customize it per student.
Yeah.
So that was helpful for me.
I'm sure. Yeah. It's always nice when you have an instructor who can kind of see immediately where people are and meet them there.
Right. Right.
I'd love to hear a little bit about when you kind of started showing your work, and what were some of the steps that you took to get your work out in front of people?
Well, it's really interesting because I do listen to your podcast, which is really, I personally like to hear everybody else's stories and kind of their path. And everybody's got a different story,
Totally different. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think one of the last workshops I took was with Kwang Ho, and I hadn't gotten in a gallery before. And he was so great, and he's just a great human being and a great painter and a visionary. And he saw my work and he asked me if I was in a gallery, and I said no. And he said, "Oh, I got to introduce you to Martha, who was from the Jack Meyer Gallery in Houston." And I thought, oh my God. Everything.
Kwang Ho is introducing me to a gallery.
Oh, what? This is like gold.
Yeah.
So I had some paintings that I had collected of mine, and he was having a show in Houston. It's like 3 hours away from here. So I went to go to the show, and he introduced me to Martha. And she was such a busybody and a socialite, and just was talking with everybody. And she said, great. Just send me an email with some images. And I was like, oh my God. So when I got home, I sent her some images. And then she emailed me back and she said, great, I want those. Here's my FedEx number, because I know you don't have any money. And oh my God, it was crazy. So
wow. So can I back you up just real quick, because this is a question I think a lot of artists have, especially at the beginning. How did you choose what works to send her?
Well, I tried to, that was hard because I did ask some friends, and I had a few little pieces. They were not big, they were just small, but I wanted to have a couple of pieces that were similar in that it's like an urban landscape. I think it was. I had to go back. I had lived with my husband in France, in Paris, for a few years. So some of those paintings were from that time. And photos I had taken while I was there and such. So I wanted to have something cohesive. And so I just sent her, I had no clue I thought she would say, oh, no, not ready. Not really.
Yeah.
Call me in a couple of years. But I was like, okay, here you go.
See what
Hopefully
happens.
this works. Yeah. Yeah. So started with that, and I did pretty well there. And she was my greatest supporter, and she and her husband Jack have since passed. So it was really unfortunate, but the gallery is taken over now by this wonderful guy, Michael Camille, and he's been such a great person and perfect person to take over the gallery, really. But anyway, I did pretty well with them. And then, you kind of I was submitting for different shows in different galleries. And then it's really different because I haven't had a set way that I go to a gallery, or a gallery finds me because they see a work that was advertised in a magazine, and then they see it on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was getting into more galleries and a little bit in over my head, not really understanding, the expectations. And
what were some of the challenges that you had that you didn't expect?
Well, I think it was managing how much you can. It's like, what do they expect from me?
Mm-hmm.
And in return, what do I expect from them? And sometimes that didn't always work out. So I think there are galleries that are fantastic people, and they're going to do what they can for you. And then there's some that absolutely don't,
right.
And they're for themselves. So I did have to go through a little bit of that. And I think probably most of us have gone through that, where you feel like a little lamb to be crucified, sacrificed in certain places, because you don't know,
Yeah.
You learn to paint, you don't learn the business side. So there was some challenges in that way.
Are you comfortable talking about how, when you decided that you were going to leave some of those galleries, how did you do it, and any sort of do's and don'ts for other artists who might be in that place? You don't have to mention any names, by the way.
No. Some gallery, because, we all go try to find a place where we fit in, and it feels great for a while, and then nothing happens. And, I've been in situations like that where, it's just kind of a very nice exchange of like, hey, I really appreciate you having me in the gallery. I'm not seeing a lot of turnaround, and, maybe we can reconnect another time, if I can get those pieces back, and look forward to seeing more show, so there is that, and they're very receptive and understanding. And then there are the terrible people.
It's hard to say it, right? But they're out there. There are some just beautiful people running galleries. Yes. And, when you find them, treat them like gold and hang on. But there are others. I've heard so many horror stories there are others, just like within any industry, there are some really good people, and there are some bad people you just want to stay away from.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had a situation which I was like desperate to get out, and didn't have I made sure to get my paintings out of there before I said goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a terrible exchange, the last phone call. And I said, okay, well, now we're done. But during that time, I was pregnant with my first child. And I also kind of used a little bit of the pregnancy card to kind of get out.
I don't blame you. I would use whatever. If you know you're in a bad situation and you're just like at that point, I think there's a certain point where the only focus is just getting your paintings back and then dealing with the rest of it, kind of cutting the cord later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was very emotional anyway. And I was like, I can't. After that phone call, I was bawling and calling another artist who was in the gallery, and we're like, oh my gosh. Just tried to okay, we're all chill, we're good, because I was not the only one having problems with that particular place. So Anyway, so I kind of narrowed it back down to 2 galleries, which was fine because I just had a kid, and I thought, Oh, yeah, sure. I'm going to be popping right back in the studio. I'm going to be able to take care of the kid and do it.
Yeah.
They're going to live my life, essentially.
They're just going to sit right in a little carrier on your front while you paint, and they're going to be calm and chill, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what actually happened?
And no, absolutely not. He was early. And he came early. He was like 6 weeks early. And that was during winter. And then he was homebound as a preemie. You're not supposed to take them outside. And I was just so inept. I was not familiar with babies. And what do I do?
They didn't give you the owner's manual when they dropped him off?
Oh my gosh. I read the books and there's like, no, you don't have this story. Did see that in the index. But then shortly after I had my first son, I was diagnosed with celiac.
Oh.
Yeah. And that manifestation was terrible, that whole experience. And I mean, obviously I figured it out after testing. So yeah, my production of any paintings done was just at a very minimal for a while.
That must have been really tough.
Yeah. And luckily my husband, he supports me and he has a job, makes money. So that was very helpful. And then one of my galleries actually gave me, this is the total opposite of the terrible, gave me a check for $3,000 for a commission he wanted me to do when I got back into it. Someday.
Oh my gosh.
So those are the people that have your back.
Yeah.
So I did that. So let's see, I tried to paint here and there, and I would try to get into some group shows so I wouldn't have to do more than a couple of pieces. And then I got pregnant again 2 years later, had my second son when my first son, Carl, was 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
So Carl ended up having moderate to severe eczema, and I had a newborn. And so I had a child with terrible eczema.
At 2.
Yes. And so the problem with that is that, they have no impulse control.
Right.
So he's just scratching, bloody.
Oh.
And he's got stuff. It's nummular eczema. So you have these patches of just terrible rashes all from head to toe.
Oh, the poor thing.
So, oh man, we went through so much with him and going to see so many doctors, and finally found a great pediatrician skin specialist. And it was so great because they totally understood the stress.
Mm-hmm.
And by then I had decided that I am going to hang up my brushes because I can't do this. I don't have the ability, the energy.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't even think about it. So I stopped painting for a couple of years just to take care of that, knowing that I will get back to it. But I compartmentalized it and said, I've got to take care of this and myself as well. So during that time, though, I would still be in touch with what's going on, in the art world, and still had my friends here, art friends here. So that kept me kind of afloat a little bit, like, oh, it's still there. I can see it in the distance.
Yeah.
Okay, now back to work.
That must have been, first of all, it must have been just so painful to watch your son in that situation and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with your own stuff with your celiac, and then you've got a newborn and you're not painting anymore.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I have to say, not only that, the whole issue with the other not so great relationship with that other gallery really kind of took the wind out of my sails, frankly.
Right.
Creatively, I was just like, what am I doing? Why?
Why am I putting myself through this?
Yeah. Yeah. It was so emotional, and like, why? This isn't fun anymore. If this is how I'm being dealt with and I'm dealing with this stuff. So it all kind of...
I went off this ride.
I know. I'm taking a break. I'm having a sabbatical.
It's really smart to do that. And I mean, I know that there's a lot of people who are listening to this who are parents of young children or parents of, grade school children, where the kids that are at that age where they still really, really need you, and you can't just dial it in. You can't just be like, hey, let me drop you off at your friend's house for a couple hours or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just can't, the chaos and the emotions that must have been happening during that time must have just been so difficult.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Trakell Art Supplies. For over 30 years, Trakell has been obsessed with the art of brush making, and now they're applying that same obsession to professional-grade panels and floating frames. They make everything right here in California at their Hesperia factory. Founder Brian Trakell started making brushes over 30 years ago, and it all started with a backpacking trip through Japan. He came across master brush makers who introduced him to the art of making brushes. He became so interested in the process that he went to Germany to learn even more from the craftsmen there. Since then, Trakell has been testing and tweaking the brushes to get the perfect balance, flow, and snap. In just a few weeks, Brian Trakell and Courtney Bridges, the president of Trakell, will be here to answer your questions about brushes and panels. Questions are coming in fast, and now it's your turn to ask. Once again, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. If there's anything you want to know about how to care for your brushes, what kind of panels you should be using, which brushes get the best results for your style of painting, whatever it is you're curious about, Trakell is happy to answer. So if you've got questions for Trakell, just go to savvypainter.com/Trakell, that's TREKELL, and submit your questions by February 15th. I always feel that we have phases to our life, and that there are just certain times where you can't have the same time and dedication that you were able to give to your art when you were, let's just forget the age, before you were married.
Yes.
You had your own, you had nobody to answer to probably, and you could do whatever you wanted. And so there's that phase. And then if you get married, then things shift a little bit. If you have kids, then things shift a lot. And within raising your children, there's all these separate phases of it. And I think it's really hard sometimes to kind of pull back and see that big picture, I guess, and realize this stage of my kid's life is only going to be a couple of years. And sometimes it feels like prison, but most of the time, you can kind of look at it like, if I can just put myself in the right frame of mind to enjoy this time and be okay with the fact that I'm not going to be able to paint 10 hours every day.
Right. And I mean, we did do, from time to time, I would try, because he did go to a Montessori half the day. But with that, that's when he had a lot of those skin issues. So, but it was to the point, it was like torture, because we would have to do bleach baths with a little child. It was just terrible. And then he was having so many medications. He was on sedatives to go to sleep at night so he wouldn't scratch himself. And we would have to hold him and keep him from scratching. And I actually would sew socks to the end of a cuff on his onesies, the footy pajamas. I would sew socks to the end so he wouldn't gouge himself at night. So, I mean, it was constant. And they would get sick all the time. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I gotta concentrate on this. But, and it took a couple of years, and he's much better. He does get some flare-ups here and there, but they're really minimal. And he can tell us, and he's like, you know what, this is itchy. We need to put some stuff on it. So that's really great, because now he's 10 years old.
So yeah, it's a different phase.
Yeah. But I'm on the one hand, people they have this linear approach to their art career. It's like, well, I'm going to get out of high school. I'm going to go to an art school. I'm going to learn classical realism. I'm going to work at this Atelier. I'm going to do this. And then they do all these steps, and I have no idea what that is. I'm just like, I'm going to draw my way to something.
It's a good plan, but most plans.
Yeah, there's no plan. I tried. Yeah. So I did get back into it when they got older, a couple of years. it was really interesting because I think that time was very helpful for me because I got more introspective. I was able to kind of see where I want to go with my painting. Because I always, like I was saying, doing commercial work. And even when I started out in galleries, I would get this positive feedback and this like, oh, you should go this way. I was always told what direction to go. And so I was like, I'm tired of having that voice on that shoulder.
Yeah.
Just saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's nice, but,
Yeah.
So I really wanted to just kind of explore painting and the joy of it. And I love painting mainly figures, figurative work. It doesn't matter if it's a portrait or, whatever. I just love painting people. I always have.
Oh my God, they're fun.
Yes.
I love that you, looking back, you realize that, for lack of better term, like that horrible period or that challenging period, I'm sure it wasn't all horrible, that you were able to pull that out of it and get more clarity and more focus in your own work. I would love now to hear a little bit about your process and what happens inside of your studio. Like when you go into your painting place. So I guess first question, do you have a studio or do you paint out of your home? And what happens when you walk in the door?
Well, so I have my studio. We actually added on to the house many years ago prior to having kids. So it's a studio that's attached to the house. And if we ever sold the house, it could be a bedroom or, somebody's studio. But we had that plan.
Nice.
And so I do have that. I do have it. At this point, I would like to have it in the backyard.
Like detached from the house, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. It's a little bit of a revolving door. And it's kind of hard to detach from your household stuff. It's like, oh, I got to go do the grocery shopping or I have to, I can't separate it.
I have to put the wash in the laundry.
Yes, it's right there, literally right outside my door.
So you can hear the buzzer go off.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, what's interesting is I like to think of, when I listen to your podcast, for example, or I'll exercise, like I'll go for power walks, and then that's my time to kind of think on my own, like what direction I want to go. And so it's really good kind of therapeutic time creatively. But as far as starting, yeah, I don't really, I go right directly in with painting, and I do paint from photos. I also I just make sure that if I paint from a photo, it is the same as if I painted from life. Because we get together, me and my painting pals, we get together every week and have a life drawing session or life painting session, which is really great.
Oh, yeah.
And it connects us together, so it's sort of like, even like what we're doing now, we're in our cave.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the world's doing, but it's good to have these kind of things to listen to other people's processes and just connecting with other artists in your community if you have a chance. It's just good.
Yeah.
Because nobody else understands it. But yeah, I have done it before where I'll do like a small study, but that usually hasn't helped me. I usually go right on in and do like an underpainting or a wash, an underpainting, and then just go right in with shapes and color and stuff like that. But as far as like coming up with a concept nowadays, when I got back into it, I really focused more on what I wanted to say. And my mom, I love her. She's my best supporter, but she's also my worst critic. So she'd be like, well, I mean, if you did this, it'd be better,
Right.
I'm like, well, negative motivation's so great. It's like, well, it's so funny because I'm not doing that. But, to trust my own voice. And I don't have so much narrative pieces. But, when you think about I try to kind of come up with how am I feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and how can I convey that? I don't like painting myself so much.
You mean like self-portraits?
Yeah, I'm not really into it. So I'd rather have a setup with a model, and convey an emotion.
How do you choose your subject?
Well, we have a lot of models here in town and I've used some of them over and over again. We're like good friends now. So there's that kind of relationship and understanding, and then bring some new people in, because you meet new models everywhere, when you go to these life drawing sessions,
Mm-hmm.
and they're usually really great people. And it's a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
When you get together and it's like, okay, I'm trying to convey this emotion and I want these elements in it. And so in that way, I usually, another thing is when I do hire a model to come to the studio, I move all of my stuff into the other room in the house. So I have to clean up my studio and make it, like put fabrics all the walls and, have things hanging and furniture. And so I'll kind of set things up.
Yeah.
And that painting I did of my son, Carl, with the trapper hat, it's called Offspring. That's kind of a play on words too, because it's off it. But anyway, that was funny because that painting was so spontaneous. My husband was out of town. It was one night before a model was going to come the next morning, and I was cleaning out my studio. The kids were getting into their pajamas, running around, running in my studio, going bananas. And my son, Carl, he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to have a model tomorrow." And he said, "Oh, take a picture of me." And he grabbed this fake flower and he put the hat on himself, and he just goes right into action. He just poses, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know why I'm hiring a model tomorrow. Right. This is brilliant. Oh my gosh, So yeah, now I got to do a painting of my other son, but he's not so into modeling. He'd be a blur. But yeah, it was pretty fun. And I kind of like that he's an artist in his own right. And it was very much of this like spontaneous collaboration.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love it because he looks so kind of elfish in that painting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he totally did that. And it was so funny because I don't know if you've seen this old photograph of Molly Ringwald in the 80s or something, and it's almost the same setup.
Really?
It freaked me out when I saw it. She's holding orchids. She's surrounded by this floral pattern behind her, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he was channeling her. Yeah. But yeah, it was kind of fun. He's really into it. So he likes to come in and watch me. So that I like.
What is it that fascinates you about painting the figure? Are you able to kind of articulate that? Is there something about it that grabs you?
I love the idea. And it's kind of funny going back from being really tight and then being really loose over the years. And then now I'm kind of pulling it back to kind of getting a little bit more accuracy with certain elements. As far as the figure, I love the idea of if you're sort of, the figure is coming out of the painting. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like manifesting in a way. So there's this environment surrounding the figure, and then I love that feel of like this subject is coming towards you, or, it's really, I don't know. I just love, it's hard to describe. I've always been fascinated. I've always wanted that challenge of like, even when I don't like a painting and where it's going, I'm going to work it through somehow.
Right.
But I want it to have life in it. And even if I don't have, I can be pretty realistic, but I'm not very tight.
Mm-hmm.
I want something to manifest. I want an image to come out and to feel the warmth and the cool of the skin, the reflection of the light. Yeah, I've just been really fascinated. I'm constantly, it's really interesting because I always think about paintings, and I'm always thinking about all the paintings I'm going to do, or at least I have an idea on some of them. But when I start a painting, I'm not really sure how it's going to turn out. I just have this blurred image and idea and patchwork. I don't have a preconceived idea. I just hope for the best. And I'm going to work hard, and I will blood, sweat, and tears to get it to a place that I feel connected to it.
What are you most proud of in your work?
It's just the satisfaction I get of being able to create something that has everything I create obviously has meaning to me. But I love seeing other people's reactions, and they have maybe a different take on it, that I didn't think about. So it's really kind of interesting to me. And I love seeing that other people find something else that speaks to them. For instance, I had a painting in the Oil Painters of America show, I guess it was last year. No, it was 2 years ago, I think, in Dallas. And it was a painting I started I did. It's called Fading. And it's this woman, it's a big square piece. And it's a woman who's kind of looking into the light. And it's kind of the area around is sort of deconstructed. And it was kind of a happy accident because the way it was painted, I couldn't get it just right. I couldn't get the composition right, and it was on board. So I sanded a lot of it down outside just to kind of have a place to start over. And the texture happening underneath was really fascinating. So I kind of used that. Her skin, for example, I'm not going into too much detail with the skin, but I left some of that out. I didn't paint it back in because the values were the same. And so it was really fun. I really enjoyed that process. It was unexpected. And so I called that painting Fading, where she's sort of like falling into this.
She's sort of like parts of her almost dissolving into the background.
Yeah. And so in the show, some woman came up to me and she said she was practically in tears when she saw it. And I was like, whoa, that was totally unexpected, but
right.
Those are fun. It's fun to see what other people see in it.
Yeah.
And what they take away from it.
When you think about the next, let's say, 5 years, just to give it a number, what are some of the challenges that you would like to overcome, either in your career or with your own work?
Well, I think this year, I think for me is just time, putting more time into it. It's really hard to manage that, especially with the kids. And we have our mothers who are getting older and having to worry about that. And so basically just wanting more time. And I want to be able to produce more so I can have more to put in shows and such. But this last half year has been really hard. But I mean, I'm always, even if I'm feeling kind of down about the work, it's hard to maintain, obviously, with this endeavor, being an artist.
Yes.
You have to have such a passion for it. It is not self-sustaining. You have to keep going. And even those days where you're like, God, I should do something else with my life,
Right.
I still, it's like, my painting, I don't like it any, it's looking terrible. You always go through these ups and downs, but I can't stop. I just cannot stop painting. It keeps me going. So I love painting so much and creating. So it's just the career choice is a challenge in general, but it's just something that I think, when you're really into it, the drive is so powerful.
Yeah.
But I have gotten into teaching now. So that's a new
a new endeavor.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It's very different to be, instead of, like we talked about earlier, in your own cave where you're just in your own head and you can just kind of like be there, versus in a room full of other artists who are looking to you for guidance.
Yeah. And, it's sort of like, in some ways, you have your right brain, your left brain, and sometimes the left brain interferes with your right brain's intuitive ability to create. Yep. And so teaching, your left brain has to be there. And so it's been kind of funny. And I've really noticed, because when I paint sometimes and I see myself getting in my own way, I'll have to distract myself, like listening to something on Audible, or even like, I might have my little phone on Netflix on my easel, and I don't watch it, but I'll listen to it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So that part of my brain is engaged somewhere else, and it's like the rest flows out.
Yep.
It's like free.
Yep. It's like giving a puppy a bone to chew on, so it's completely engrossed and distracted while you work on the other part of the brain.
Exactly.
Karen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a great conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Painter podcast with my guest, Karen Offutt. To see examples of Karen's work, get links to any of the artists and resources that we mentioned, go to savvypainter.com. You'll see that painting of Karen's son. It is a gorgeous piece, and you can connect with Karen or get more information on Atelier Dojo Austin. One more thing I want to let you know. This year, you can expect a lot more workshops from Savvy Painter. If you are an artist who struggles with getting painting time in or feels like you're always busy but never really moving forward with your art, then my workshops just might interest you. Past workshops include Mindset Mastery, a 5-week online workshop to help you get past the roadblocks that keep you from painting. In it, we tackle the inner critic, fears of artists, and setting yourself up for a successful creative day. The workshop, How to Develop a Relationship with the Right Gallery, helped several artists find the right gallery and show their work. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to savvypainter.com/workshop and get on the email list. This is separate from the main list that tells you when a new episode comes out. This is just for the workshop, so you don't get quite as many emails, but when you do, there's always something really good happening. Sign up now and get a downloadable PDF with case studies that tell you exactly how 3 artists pushed through barriers that were getting in the way of their studio time. You can, for example, learn how Rhonda went from not wanting to call herself an artist to getting her very first solo show. Also, listen to an introverted artist describe how she built her confidence and then spoke in front of an audience of her peers. And you can discover the tools that Samantha used to take back her power after a decade of believing that she had no, I'm putting air quotes there, she had no talent. So again, go to savvypainter.com/workshop to reserve your place on the list. When you sign up, you get that downloadable case studies that I mentioned, but more importantly, you get exclusive invites to upcoming workshops. Most of the time when I launch a new program, it sells out before I ever announce it publicly. So reserve your spot now at savvypainter.com/workshop. Until next week, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter podcast. Thank you so much for listening.